18 and I just started my private massage therapy business. For years of working at spas and chiropractors' offices, I wanted to be my own boss. Rented a small studio space in a quiet town called Maplewood, Oregon. It wasn't much, just one room with soft lighting, a massage table in the center. My go-to Spotify playlist of spa music looping in the background. But it was mine, and I loved it. Most of my clients were regulars, locals, some athletes, and a few referrals from the gym down the street. They'd book sessions through my website, come in and leave happy. That's how it went 99% of the time. Then one night, I got an online booking request from someone new. His name was Tom Blackwell. It was for an 8 p.m. session, the last slot of the day. I usually didn't like taking late-night appointments, but business had been slow that week. Honestly, I could use the money. Tom's intake form didn't raise any red flags. He listed back pain as his main concern and mentioned that he worked in construction. That wasn't unusual. Construction workers are always coming in with knots the size of golf balls. I confirmed the booking and thought nothing of it. The client, Tom, showed up right on time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and worn jeans. Kind of guy you'd expect to see swinging a hammer or loading lumber into a truck. "You, Jake?" he asked as he stepped into the studio. I nodded, shook his hand, and led him into the room. His grip was firm, almost too firm, but I brushed it off. During the consultation, he told me his lower back had been bothering him for weeks. He said he thought he might have pulled something lifting heavy materials at work. Again, nothing unusual. But there was something about Tom that put me on edge. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way his eyes kept darting around the room like he was casing the place. Or maybe it was how he didn't smile not once. Still, I've always prided myself on staying professional no matter how a client acts. So, I told him to undress to his comfort level and get under the sheet while I stepped out to wash my hands. The session begins. When I came back into the room, Tom was lying face down on the table, the sheet pulled up to his waist. First few minutes of the massage were uneventful. His muscles were tight just as he'd said, and I worked on his lower back, kneading out the knots. But as the session went on, things started to feel off. For one, he wasn't relaxing. Most clients, even the chatty ones, eventually settle into the session, letting their breathing slow and their bodies loosen up. Not Tom. He stayed tense the entire time, his fists clenched at his sides. And then there were the questions. "So, you work here alone?" he asked, his voice muffled against the face cradle. That question made me pause. Most clients ask about techniques, stretches, or my experience, not whether I work alone. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "It's just me." He grunted like that was the answer he'd been hoping for. A few minutes later, he asked, "What time do you usually close?" My stomach tightened. Something about the way he asked made my skin crawl. But I played it cool, telling him that his session was my last of the day. That's when I noticed something else. His breathing had changed. It was faster now, almost shallow, like he was working himself up. My instincts were screaming at me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was just nervous, I told myself. Maybe he wasn't used to massages. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The turning point, about 30 minutes into the session. I asked him to flip over so I could work on his neck and shoulders. That standard procedure, nothing out of the ordinary. But when he flipped, I saw the look in his eyes. There was something predatory about it. He didn't look tired or relaxed. He looked alert, focused. I tried to continue the session, keeping my voice calm. "How's the pressure?" I asked, like I always do. "It's fine," he said flatly. But his eyes never left me. That's when he said something that made my blood run cold. "You ever have problems with clients getting too close?" I stopped for a second, unsure how to respond. "Really," I said, trying to keep things light. "Most people just want a good massage." He smirked, a slow, unsettling smile. "I bet they do." I stepped back, pretending to adjust the oil bottle on the counter. But while trying to figure out my next move, I was alone with this guy. The door was locked, and suddenly the small studio that had once felt cozy now felt like a trap. The escape. At this point, I was in full fight or flight mode. I didn't want to panic, but I needed to end the session as quickly as possible. I told Tom that time was almost up and started wrapping things up. But as I reached for the towel to wipe off his arms, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was iron tight and his smile was gone. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" he asked, his voice low. My heart was pounding. I yanked my wrist free and stepped back, putting the massage table between us. "The session's over," I said firmly. "You need to leave." For a moment, he just stared at me like he was deciding whether or not to listen. Then slowly, he sat up. "Just kidding," he said, holding up his hands like I was overreacting. But his eyes told a different story. I stood frozen as he got dressed, keeping my distance until he finally walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back and said, "Maybe I'll book another session soon." I didn't say a word. I just locked the door behind him and collapsed into the chair, shaking. The aftermath. The next morning, I told Sarah, the owner of the coffee shop downstairs, what had happened. She suggested I call the police, but I didn't have much to tell them, just a bad feeling and a name that might have been fake. I decided to look him up online. That's when I found the news articles. Tom Blackwell wasn't a construction worker. He was a drifter with a record-along one. Assault, theft, stalking. He'd been in and out of jail for years, and from what I could tell, he had a habit of targeting people who worked alone. They told me I was lucky that guys like him don't usually stop at scaring people. To that, I changed everything. No more late-night appointments. I installed cameras, kept pepper spray in my pocket, and always told someone when I had a new client. But even now, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut. If you're listening to this and you work alone, whether you're a massage therapist, a hairstylist, or anything else, please trust your instincts. They might save your life. Have you ever had a client or a customer who set off alarm bells in your head? A moment where your gut told you something was wrong? If you have, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. And if this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I've got plenty more true crime horror stories to keep you on edge. Until next time, stay safe and trust your instincts.